Welcome back to the Jumpify Labs podcast, where we explore what it takes to grow teams, leaders, and businesses that actually perform. Today, we're joined by Dan Winter, principal at Altus Growth Partners and former HR director at Intel, who spent decades helping smart teams figure out why great strategies will sometimes still fail to take root. Dan, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here, Jay.
Pleasure's all mine, brother. Okay, let's start off. You started your story in a small town in Northern California that turned into Silicon Valley. What was that like watching that transformation happen?
It was really interesting. When I started off, everything was orchards, and there'd always be one more development, one more set of buildings. And I can remember sitting there in junior high school, watching them put up the first buildings for Apple. And by the time I got to college, this was a very, very different place. And there was a real startup mentality for a whole bunch of industries, a whole bunch of companies. Almost missed how much this was the central place for so much of that. It seemed very much like that was just the way the world was until I started doing work with other companies and traveling and seeing just how special Silicon Valley was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and after 30 years of corporate leadership, what made you decide to take that move and go into consulting for yourself?
It really was two things. One, and I think we've seen this with Intel. I had been working very hard inside that company for 30 years, trying to shape and fight some of the culture. And I saw where that culture was going and just did not feel like spending another 10 years doing that. And also realized that the piece of the work that I loved was working with leaders, working with teams, standing up leaders and teams all over the world, doing a lot of work across cultures, across generations. And the work that I was doing at Intel that they wanted me to focus on was really core HR. And that was less exciting and less interesting. I'd done it for 10 years. I'd done it well, but the place that just lit me up was taking someone who was a good manager and was just trying to figure out how to lead and how to lead teams of employees that were really different than them and to take them into unknown spaces. And as a consultant, I could do that work full time and just focus on that and not have to worry about coordinating a layoff, coordinating annual reviews. And so I like getting out of the process work and really focusing on the things that made the biggest difference to the people that I could work with, and then leave the process work to the people who were really good at that and enjoyed it.
Yeah, so it sounds like you had the mix of two things, the mix of seeing the good and then also a mix of seeing the bad that really pushed you towards this journey.
Yeah, that was really what drove me into leadership development. I had not intended to go into this work, and I moved over to the finance organization at Intel, and the CEO came to us and said, I need you to grow leaders, and I'm pretty sure you're going to fail. The company at that time under Andy Grove, and it was brilliant at the time, was really viewing leadership as managing something big and complicated. Right? How do you run 5 factories around the world in lockstep to produce incredibly high volume of incredibly complicated products? And unfortunately, what that created was a sense that managing something big and complicated was the same thing as leading. And so there was a lot of, take the playbooks that we developed in one industry and apply it when we tried to play in new industries. And Andy Bryant, who eventually became CEO, at this time he was CFO, said, I need you to grow me finance leaders. I don't know you're going to succeed. That for me was just a pretty interesting challenge. And so we spent probably 2 years wrestling with how do you grow leaders. Andy also had challenged us to not have a leadership model. He said, every leadership model starts with have a vision. I don't think I have a vision, but I think I'm a good leader. So you can't tell people how to lead. The people that they report to don't particularly understand or value leadership. But this is critical. A group of us, several finance controllers, senior controllers, and myself, stepped into that challenge and figured out how do you take a group of people, and finance is among the strongest at this, who really like to manage and get them into that unknown space of leadership. I used to tell them in one of our earliest conversations, if you know how to get there, you manage. If you don't know how to get there, you lead. And finance is about control, right? The job is controller, not manager. And so, I had this group of people who were really struggling with dealing with uncertainty, dealing with unknowns, navigating and making commitments about a future that they didn't control. And how do you help them step into that space and take on that uncertainty and learn new skills when the environment around them says you're going to be evaluated based on your ability to hit plan right? At the beginning of the year, you set a revenue target, you set a volume target, and don't change it. And that uncertainty was really hard to navigate. And for me, it was just a blast to go play in that unknown territory for the company and for the teams.
Yeah. You know, one thing you said that's really interesting is your don't start with a leadership model because they all start at vision. I've been on calls with many, I've had a bunch of episodes with leaderships who do start at vision. So if it's not starting at vision, where do you start?
This is part of where Altus Growth Partners focuses. It gets to our core definition of what is a team. And for us, a team is a group of people who take responsibility to create a future, which is a shared promise. And then they commit to coordinate well to produce that future. And at some level, you need kind of a long-term vision, but what you really need is a shared understanding of the future you're trying to create. And so we would have people come in and we'd say, session 1, bring in your vision. And if that's the 17 slides you and your team have been operating under for 5 years, fantastic. If it's the pencil scratch on the napkin you wrote on the corporate shuttle flying down for the morning, bring that in. And then we would help them really craft that into something compelling. In many cases, their quote unquote vision wasn't very different than their present, right? It's whatever we're doing now plus a 7% CAGR. It's like, okay, right, why is anyone going to bother to work for you? Why is anyone going to bother to work for that team versus any other team? Why are they going to wake up and pour discretionary effort into creating that change? Let's get out of the numbers and into your heart and see if that heart grabs some fellow travelers. And helping them learn that part of that vision, and I'm agnostic, vision, mission, goals, I kind of don't care, but tell me the future 3 years from now that's going to be different than today. And then how do you move from that being your vision as the leader to our vision as a team? That I am so committed to what we're trying to do that I'm going to pour in time and effort. And I always told leaders, the big test, what about this is worth 3 years of your life? Because whatever change you're driving is going to take 3 years of your life and you never get that back. Right? If I blow a bunch of money, I can make money again. If I, have something else that I've spent, I can get that back. Time I can never get back. So you're literally asking yourself and a group of people to spend 3 years of their life that they will never get back in exchange for creating something that is meaningful and worth that 3 years of their life. And that's different than the kinds of goals that I see a lot of organizations write.
Wow. Yeah, that's a banger line right there for sure. And a lot of times we focus on the funds when funds we can gather funds, we can always make more money, but we'll never get back the time. So I appreciate you for sharing that. I want to talk about generative leadership, which is one of your approaches. But before we do, you did mention as well, you spend a lot of time in Asia. Are there any memorable leadership lessons or cultural insights that have changed how you approach, I guess, team development?
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 that really hit me. I was going out to China 3 or 4 times a year to do 2-hour coaching sessions with people coming up through the leadership pipeline in finance. And it is somewhat terrifying to have someone from corporate drop 2 hours on your calendar and you're not quite sure what it's going to look like. And you don't really know what a coach is and you can't quite tell how much you can trust that person. And so I would always tell people in the first meeting, it's going to take you 6 months to figure out whether or not you trust me and in what ways you trust me. And it's okay if you don't. Let me know if I'm ever doing or saying anything that gets in the way of that. I want to be trustworthy. But if you don't trust me, then we can certainly find safe topics to talk about. We can talk about one of your employees that you need help with, right? That's fine. But ultimately, the power of this is going to be coaching you on you and your growth. And consistently, they would come back to me a year or 2 years later and say, Dan, it was 6 months. And at 6 months, I finally was comfortable opening up about things that for them were often cultural issues that they were facing for the first time. So when I was working with people in Shanghai, they'd seen 25 years of 10% growth. They'd never seen a downturn. And I remember Silicon Valley when it was in 20 years of growth, but I also remember the downturns and the big economic shifts. And so I could help them see a little bit of the future that was around the corner and how they needed to think about their role as that evolved. And for instance, Shanghai had been opened up as a low-cost alternative. And then because China took off, we were giving 10% raises every year. And we got to a point where middle and senior management positions were as expensive as the US. And I looked at the finance leaders and said, be clear. You are getting paid global salaries, which means you have to be competitive in terms of talent. Your job as a manager, your job as a controller is to develop global talent that the US sees as worth the money we're paying. Otherwise, we might as well just do that work in the US. And it was a real shift for them to see themselves not as a low-cost alternative, but truly global.
Wow. That is a mindset shift.
Yeah. And I was walking through the halls in Chengdu, China, in one of our factories. And a young man, maybe 30, came up to me and said, "Hey, Dan, I see on my calendar you and I have time scheduled for a coaching session. And I'm not quite sure what we're going to talk about, but I'm 30. I'm a controller. I've done everything I wanted to do in life, and I'm not quite sure what's next." And I looked at him and said, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I could be wrong. But my suspicion is you've actually done everything your parents wanted you to do in life. And now for the first time, you're thinking about yourself. And I don't know that you've practiced that very much. And he just stopped and looked at me and went, this is going to be a good conversation. Because a lot of what I was coaching people on was not just business and strategy and leadership, but how do I navigate my family responsibilities in China, which are very different than the US, right? You have to go home to your family twice a year by law for some of these. And we were opening up in tier 2 and tier 3 cities and hiring people from tier 1, and they had to make time to go back. We would ask them to work international assignments. So I need you to go work in Vietnam. And you have elderly parents that are wondering why you're taking a job in Vietnam as opposed to having kids and giving us grandchildren. And this was a generation of people who just had not practiced those conversations and thought them through and didn't know how to have that conversation with their boss without derailing their careers. And so I was doing coaching about the whole person in the context of being a leader for 30, 40 years, both in China, but even more so in a global environment. And that realization really drove home that leadership isn't about skills. It's about integrity, and not just not lying or cheating, but who you are and the life you want to live and what role leading a company, leading a team plays in that.
Yeah, that's amazing. That you got to, well, not amazing. Maybe amazing is not the right word, but it is a big drastic shift in the cultural difference. I'm not Chinese, I'm Filipino, but there is a strong emphasis on keeping that family bond strong. So there is, I'm thinking back to when I first joined the military, my mom did not like that. So I had to, I was raised in America, so I adopted American values and then I joined the military, but my mom was super against it. I definitely would fall underneath the same client that you had where I was doing everything for what my parents, well, my mom specifically, my mom, my uncle, they wanted me to do. So I can definitely relate to what you just mentioned.
And to be able to do that in a way that doesn't ask you to give up your integrity and give up who you are. So maybe show up in a more flexible way, maybe show up somewhat differently with a broader range of choices. But I saw people who felt like they were being asked to give up who they were in order to become who they thought the company wanted them to be. And I don't think any of us has a right to demand that of another person. But once you start realizing I can still hold on to the things that are important to me, I can hold on to my integrity, and I can now navigate some more purposeful choices. And most importantly, have the conversations I need to have in order to make that happen. And that's where generative leadership really steps in, right? Where generative says all results come from conversations. And sometimes that's the results that we don't want. Sometimes that's the conversation I had with my parents that I'm still carrying. And I'm carrying the conversation of a child into adulthood. Other times it's the conversation I'm having with myself and just the story that I'm living in, the programming that I'm running on that I don't even know where it came from, but I use it as my default. And then at its strongest, it's the conversation we're having right now and the next conversation we have that will create a better future than the one that I'm seeing.
Yeah. So man, such good insight there. You do come from As I mentioned, I want to talk about generative leadership. You touched on it a little tiny bit, but for those unfamiliar and maybe hearing it for the first time, how would you describe it in simple language?
Um, it's getting better at conversations and figuring out what's missing and what could be brought into the conversation or to shift the conversation and your interpretation. It's like we often think that reality is out there, but reality is what we perceive of what's out there. One of my best examples when I became an HR director, I had avoided HR for years. I did not want to work in HR. I did not want to do line HR, but I ended up applying for an HR director job as a defensive move during a reorg. And all of a sudden, I went from an individual contributor to managing a team of 25 people across multiple sites and a couple in Asia. And I had a lot of people in the group that I supported who were constantly criticizing me, always telling me what I wasn't doing very well. Within 5 days, I came to the realization that not one of those people wants me to fail, and none of them wants my job. And so instead of 1,500 critics, I actually had 1,500 friends who were giving me advice on how I could do my job better. And now I could hear it all. I didn't have to get defensive. I didn't have to worry. I didn't have to tense up and lock down. I didn't have to get reactive. I could say, oh, tell me more. And then I can decide that I have choice over what I do with that. And so I don't have to feel like I'm being forced into something I don't want to do. I may quit, but I don't have to be forced. And that was purely a shift in my own head, going from being criticized by people that didn't fully appreciate me to being helped by people who wanted me to be incredibly successful because they needed me to do my job even better than I was doing it. And that's one of those shifts from a coaching or from a generative standpoint, just that little shift. Another one, I was working with one of my favorite senior leaders. She ran about 2/3 of the finance organization, and she was incredibly good and very detail oriented, tons of experience. And I turned to her and said, you keep asking me questions I don't have the answers to, and I'm not sure if I'm doing this job the way you need it done. And she said, Dan, you're doing great. I should probably tell you that more often. I said, no, my inner demon, not your problem. I will ask you to do me a favor. If I'm ever not doing the job the way you need it done, you'll tell me. I don't need you to tell me I'm doing a good job. I just can't right now figure out the signal about whether or not I'm doing a good job. So I don't know when I need to adjust. So feel free to criticize me, but criticize me clearly. She said, absolutely. I will be glad to tell you when you're not doing the job the way you need it done. I said, fantastic. You don't need to praise me at all. So those kinds of shifts in perception, shifts in relationships, getting clear about what we're going to do as a team to support each other, as opposed to I'm feeling kind of uncomfortable. And what my favorite coaches, Steve Levin, used to tell me early on, we collude to avoid hard conversations. Right? If you've done something to disappoint me, if I think maybe I've missed something, we tend to shut up and walk our own ways and hope that the problem goes away. Generative leadership says, I think we have a breakdown, and if we're out of alignment, I would love to get back in alignment. So Jay, here's what I was expecting. Here's what you did. I don't know if I wasn't clear. I don't know if you misunderstood me. I don't know if I forgot to say something that was important. But now we have this great opportunity to get back in alignment and work together even better given that learning. So I'm going to celebrate every time I get out of alignment as opposed to being worried or afraid or ashamed whenever misalignment happens.
Right. It's like a feedback point telling you you're a little off track. Let's quickly get back on track. So it's seen as an opportunity instead of a dire problem, which problems essentially are opportunities in business. But you sounds like you self-coached yourself to changing the perspective and seeing it as for what it was, as an opportunity to get better.
And I'd refine that a little bit. You said you're off track. It may not be that I'm off track. It's we're off track, right? You have hosted this podcast 50 times. You know what it takes to get into the software, configure the software, make sure the video is looking good. You know what a good background looks like, etc. You give guidance based on what you take for granted. Someone who hasn't done it before, someone who doesn't have any of that technology, they don't even know how to make sense of what you said. That's not because they're stupid or slow or wrong. It's just because there's a bunch of stuff in your head that's not in their head. There's a bunch of stuff in your body and your practice that's not in theirs. And so it's about when we get off track, when we get out of alignment, so that I can say, oh God, I just took that for granted. I am so sorry. I didn't realize that you didn't know that because I've been doing this for so long. And that was one of the things that I really picked up with some of the cross-cultural and international work, right? Things that I just took for granted because I was in hallways in corporate headquarters talking to people about stuff that the people overseas might hear in a 30-minute open forum if someone bothered to talk about it. And so there's a whole bunch of things that I know and I understand, and a lot of kind of why we're doing the things we're doing and where that's trying to lead to. And all they heard was the tasks that got waterfalled down to them through their managers. And half of that was not quite aligned, and some of it never actually got waterfalled. And so getting that clarity of I think we're out of alignment, or let me just ask this to make sure, here's what's in my head, let me double check if that's what you meant to say. And that's where generative is most powerful, is here's the things I'm taking for granted, here's the things you're taking for granted. My goodness, those can't both be true. And I'm about to go ask my team to go do some things that are misaligned with what you're expecting because we have different interpretations of what it is we're truly trying to do. I had a client recently doing a Salesforce installation. And the project manager who reported to her, she was a couple levels down, they were doing a project review, and she realized the project manager had a great project plan for implementing Salesforce that didn't mention anything about retraining and ensuring that the sales team changed their behaviors to use the new software. They thought their job was to install the software, not to change the revenue capability of the company or to create a 15% efficiency in their sales team. And in that meeting was one of the senior salespeople. They didn't bother to mention it because they viewed it as a software implementation. And if they needed the salespeople to change, someone would let them know. As opposed to, we as a team own this outcome and you own the software piece of it. I own the user experience and the user piece of it. How are we going to align to make sure that that change actually happens? And we've seen this over and over and over in organizations. Everyone delivers what they were told to deliver, and the organization still doesn't get the results.
Yeah, it sounds like a case of, oftentimes, this is just a case in all relationships, really, where we think we're communicating enough, but we're really not.
Yeah.
So
we always say it's not what you say, it's the listening you create. And how do you know what listening you've created?
that makes my mind turn.
And I'll have leaders who say, well, we were really clear. It's like, yeah, what listening did you create? Were they paying attention? The marketing people say you need to hear something 8 times to remember it. And leaders get frustrated if they have to lay something out twice. They're like, okay, then the marketing research says that you're not creating listening very often.
Yeah. Well, let's take a pivot right now. I want to talk about Altus Growth because you described it as a superhero team of consultants. What makes it different from other consulting firms?
Couple of things that really stand out. One, we all are committed to a generative approach. So I've known a number of consulting firms where the focus is on the process, the tools that the consulting team uses. So here is our 2-day strategy workshop. Here is our this, here is our that. Altus is about the quality and effectiveness and the rhythm of the conversations. We very much focus on the people. So we may get hired to help a company with strategy. And as we get into the conversations, you start seeing the interpersonal and the human breakdowns, right? I'll talk about it as you get out onto the ice and discover how thin it is. And not only do we have to work with the rational piece of that, but we also have to work with the interpersonal piece of that. And we've seen in strategy conversations, when things get heated, often people just defer to leadership. So engineering thinks this is what it should be. Marketing thinks this is what it should be, but the CEO says it should be this. So that's what we're going to agree on. And again, they collude to avoid the hard conversation. We'll bring it out and say, okay, the CEO is saying we need to get there. Engineering, you've got a very different view of this. What are you seeing? What are you paying attention to? What questions do you have? Well, I don't think the sales team's competent to generate that revenue. Okay, what would you need to see? What information are you basing that on? And it's not blame. There's some observation, there's some story, there's some dots that they've turned into a picture. And we'll turn to the salesperson and say, okay, help us understand that information. Why, based on that history, is there something that engineering's not seeing? Or have you changed something? And I've had teams where, production and product management are at each other's throats. Literally had in 1 week, 2 VPs come to me independently and say they were going to quit because they could not stand working with that other team anymore. And when I got them into a room, it was just clear that what was being provided to the production team was not in a form and not at a level of specificity that they could take action on. So they felt constantly like they didn't know what was expected and they didn't know what to do to be successful and they couldn't plan for the work. And all we did was just figure out, okay, what's the template that production needs to get? What's the questions that they need answered? What's the data they need and when do they need it? And then can we take all of this great fuzzy product marketing slideware and turn it into that production ready request for the engineers to go do what they do? And once we got that, the teams were off and running. But literally executives that were ready to quit because of the dysfunction. And so we'll be in that space of this is very, very rational. This is very, very rational. But the moods, the emotions, the anger that shows up in the frustration of the breakdowns and how they're not dealing with the breakdowns. And so I love that Altus can handle the very rational, but we also move very comfortably into helping people with the piece that they're less familiar with, they're less comfortable with, the human piece that gets in the way of a lot of that rational work. And the practitioners in Altus are very tuned into both sides of that. And I see lots of other consulting groups, they're either very process oriented or they're very kind of soft team building oriented. We focus on helping you run the business from a human standpoint and to build that human connection over time so that you can be successful and generative yourself, not just coached into success.
Yeah, you also mentioned that Altus has a book. Who would it be? Who would be the person to read that book, and what would be their main takeaway?
Yeah, the book was a ton of fun. It's called Growing Groups into Teams. We wrote it. It was interesting. There were multiple authors. Like each of us came up with a chapter. And we tried to pick topics that were not already covered in everyone else's book, right? There's a ton of books out there on teams and leadership. And a couple of my favorite chapters. One of our consultants lived in Africa for several years as part of her husband's travels. And she was asked to electrify a village. And she said it took her a year to figure out if she actually had a team, because running wires is not hard. But having a team of people who are committed to maintaining the system, both within the town and to keep the electricity flowing to the town when she's gone, is going to require real commitment to people to create and sustain that future when she's not there to do it. And so she talks about, as a leader, how do you know if you have a team or if you just have a group of people or if you just have a sponsor and a budget, but actually no team? And I've seen lots of times where organizations are looking for significant change and they say, great, we've got a project manager. And they tell that person that they're in charge and, people have to work with them, but they never establish a team. The leaders who sponsor that team never commit to reconciling their own disagreements. And so that team ends up failing over time. So I really love that chapter for just calling out a question that most of us take for granted. One of our other chapters is about recognizing commitment in the body. Like most of us, when I say, hey, can you do this? And the other person says, yeah, we think we have a commitment, but commitment shows up in the body. It shows up in action. And the first clues are that little bit of a hint when you hear that, yeah. And if I'm really committed to success, I'm going to say, Jay, I hear your intention and your desire to do this, but I also hear some uncertainty. Can you tell me what's behind the uncertainty? And you say, I've never done something like that. I say, fantastic. Would you like me to coach you and give you some playbooks to do that? Or I could meet with you every other day and you can brainstorm with me how you want to approach it. Or you say, I'm really interested in that. I want to do it, but I think my boss isn't going to let me, but maybe I can do it under the table. And I'm like, I appreciate your intention. I don't know that you actually have the authority to say yes to me. And so do I pick up on that little signal and go back into that conversation and into that relationship? to test whether you've really made a committed promise or if you've just said words to allow us to go away for a couple of weeks and save face to then have a really good excuse why you can't actually get it done. And so I love that the chapter calls out this very subtle aspect of teams and commitment that most books, did you write it down and it is on your calendar? Yeah, that's nice. Is it showing up in your body? Are you picking up on the uncertainty? Or are you just, again, colluding to avoid the conversation? You look uncomfortable saying yes, but you said yes, so I'm just going to hope that it shows up in 2 weeks when you said it would. So the book is written, each chapter's standalone. It's got a few good reflections, a nice story about what that leadership move looks like, and then some questions or practices the leader can put into practice for themselves. And it was a blast to write. The consultant we used was slightly horrified by our plan to let everyone edit every chapter. So, 10, 11, 12, 13 people all taking a run at editing. And she's like, you need 1 or 2 editors. You have to, it's like, we understand, but we want to understand each other's work, each other's thinking. And because each of us has worked in aspects of this, we may have some insights to add to each chapter. And it took us a little longer to do it, but we ended up with a book that was very rich. And then a ton of great LinkedIn posts based on, hey, you may want to add this to your chapter. It's like, too many words. We don't have enough space for it, but that'd be a great LinkedIn post on that topic that we can reinforce. Or now I realize one of my partners has experience in that area, and you've given me a new idea for an activity or an insight that I can use with my partner beyond just the chapter that I.
That's such a fun way to write a book, man. You share that. It's like you have people that are all kind of giving their own insights. They're editing each other's. They're getting better as consultants themselves, making the book that much more powerful. What a fun collaborative way to write a book. That's really cool.
And that's when you ask what's different about Altus, that's one of the things that's really different. And it's been interesting as some of our newer members have joined. Most of us come into an organization and we think we have to be fully competent and prove ourselves to stay in the organization. And at Altus, we expect everyone to be in learning mode. And so if Jay, you join us and you say, hey, I've got a client who's interested in this, I don't really know how to do it. Does anyone know how to do it? And we're like, woohoo, great opportunity for us to help you learn something. Or, and I've done this with one of our new consultants, it's like, tell me the date and the time, I'll show up. I'll even do it for free. You already committed to the client that we're all going to charge this much. I'll come and do this with you so you can see me in action and I can see you in action. And now you'll know how to do it when I'm not there. So it's an investment in the development of each other. And we don't for 1 second look critically as a negative when someone needs some help, right? This is that generative piece. We're misaligned. I think this is one way to do it. You think that's one way to do it. What a great chance for us to get aligned. I've got this expertise. You've got that expertise. What a great chance for us to learn from each other. And you don't see that, competition or you're a junior person, so you don't have a say. It's like, yeah, you're a junior person, but you've got all of this other experience. You just need to refine it over here. So let's use what you've got and add these other pieces and let's keep running at it. For me, it's a very collaborative and creative environment. We just had 3 of our people go down to Texas and spent 3 days with one of our consultants learning about somatic leadership with horses.
Okay.
And we talk about, the importance of nonverbals. You want to learn how to do nonverbal leadership? Go work with a horse because they don't talk. But boy, do they express themselves. And so one of our consultants has been really leaning into horse facilitation, horse therapy for leadership development. And 2 of our other consultants went down to take a workshop and it was transformative. The stories that I got from them were just great.
Wow, that's amazing. That sounds like another really interesting conversation.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a fun conversation, Dan. Is there any preferred way that you would like for executives or any other founders to reach out if they're possibly interested in working with you?
Absolutely. They can reach out to me directly at dwinter@altusgrowth.com. Come out to our website. We've got contact information. We always love to talk. We don't look to close a deal when someone has a problem they're ready to solve immediately. We like to have the conversation because often we find that leaders are wrestling with the current symptoms, but they're not necessarily, they would benefit from a bit larger conversation about everything that's going on. And so we love having conversations and we're not in that mode of, if you talk to me for 30 minutes, I want to watch a contract signed at the end of it. It's like, I'm just fascinated by your business and what's going on with your team. And if there's an opportunity for work together at some point, that would be great. So we love having them reach out and get into that first conversation to hear where they are as leaders, where they are as teams, and what are some of the opportunities to help them be even more effective. I like to think about individuals and leaders who are really facing a transition or an inflection or trying to create one. So leaders who are moving into new jobs, moving into new companies, new roles, or a leadership team where the company is facing a shift or looking to create a major shift and discovering that maybe the leaders are not growing as fast as the company is, right? Their leadership capabilities, they're good at leading a 25-person team, but not a 100-person team. Or they've just gone from developing a really cool product and now they need to turn that product into something that's really being sold and supported at scale. And by the way, we need 2 more products in order to really grow the company where we want to. Or a lot of post M&A work where a finance person has put together a proposition for the value of the deal. And then when the leaders get together in the room, they discover that there's something not working the way they would expect, and they're not creating the value they expected. So we love it when companies are really looking to make a significant shift, make a significantly bigger promise, and are looking to get ahead of that to grow the company and grow the people.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Thank you so much, Dan. This has been a very fun conversation, educational for me for sure. I love the emphasis on generative leadership, over communicating versus under communicating, and reading between the lines for keeping a lookout on the body, the subtle cues that we often miss if we're just listening to the words. If you like this episode, if you want to reach out to Dan, please do so. He's at Altus. He dropped his email. I don't remember what the actual email website was.
dwinter at altusgrowth.com or go to our website, altusgrowth.com.
Yes, definitely reach out to Dan. Him and his team at Altus, they'll have us very fun, what seems like a very fun culture over there, and they'll inject that culture into helping you get to where you need to get to. If you like more stories like this, please tune in for more. We have fascinating leaders coming from all walks of business, all walks of cultures, all kinds of different cool people coming on. My name is Jay. Thanks so much, and we'll talk again soon.
Great. Pleasure, Jay.